and welcome everyone to another episode of Wise Women Wednesdays. I am Jennifer Regular, your host here, and also a soul-centered empowerment coach at Lighting the Path. Today, I am so excited to have Michelle Castelli here. She's coming in from Rochester, New York. She is the wife and mother of 3 adult children and 1 adorable beagle. She's also an author, a speaker, a spiritual director, and a relationship coach, helping men and women grow into stronger, healthier relationships in regard to dating, marriage, themselves, and their spiritual connections. And knowing that an unhealthy relationship with the self can affect all other relationships, she's here to discuss the attitudes that can get in the way of our self-care. So welcome, Michelle. It's so wonderful to have you here today.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate it. And welcome to your audience today. I appreciate it very much.
Yes, I so appreciate the audience listening as well. And so what kind of attitudes, Michelle, can get in the way of self-care? But more importantly, how did you even come to this place where you found that self-care was vital to your well-being?
Yeah, it's kind of a process throughout my life. My mom was sick a great deal of my childhood. We grew up with her experiencing multiple illnesses, pneumonia, Legionnaire's disease. So watching physical self-care and how it impacted her mental and emotional well-care and how they're all tied together, she was struggling with that for many years, and just witnessing that as a child, watching someone struggle on all 3 fronts for their self-care, really led to me, wanting to help people who are struggling with self-care, struggling with relationship issues, because everything's tied together. If your attitudes are hurting you, it affects your self-care. Your self-care affects all of your other relationships. So that was the starting point. It was really the relationship and the issues that I saw my mom dealing with. Yeah.
Yes, and that can be very difficult to witness, isn't it?
It is.
And so I can understand you wanting to do something to make things better, right? To make her better and for you to feel better too.
Right.
Now you're making millions of people feel better.
That would be good.
So what have you found? What kind of attitudes do get in the way of our self-care?
Well, it's important, I always take a look at what people bring to relationships. Attitudes are one part of it, which we're going to talk about today. But we also bring our motivations. We also bring values. We bring this whole set of ourself into each of our relationships. And if we're carrying negative motivations or negative values, or especially like what we're talking about today, negative attitudes, sometimes people are unaware of it. And you're going into relationships carrying this pain or this frustration, and your other relationships get affected. So I wanted to focus today on attitudes, because negative attitudes can really cause us a lot of pain in our relationships, and it's important to take a look at them. So when I use the definition of self-care, it's holistic, and I'm sure as yours is too, the physical, the social, the emotional, the spiritual. That's what I mean by wellness and self-care from that point of view, that we're looking at a holistic approach.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned social in there as well, because a lot of people don't fit that in. And as you say, it can affect our relationships too. So of course, social aspect should be in there. So tell us more.
Yeah, so here's some of the common attitudes that I have witnessed as a therapist and relationship coach that people can carry with them, bring them in, not even be aware of it, especially in relationships. So, for example, a top one is, I am not lovable. They carrying around this underlying sense that people are not going to want to be in relationships with them because they've picked up a message either from early childhood or from broken relationships, friendships, broken marriages, that they're no longer lovable. And they may not even be aware of it, but when it comes out in their relationships, when other people who are interacting with them start to observe that, they see them talking negatively about themselves. They see them acting negatively toward themselves. So sometimes the feedback doesn't come from ourselves. It usually comes from others that have picked up when they're interacting with us that we're not being good to ourselves. We're not being kind to ourselves in the way that we talk. We're not being kind in how we take care of ourselves, socially, emotionally, physically, spiritually. So a common attitude for a lot of people that they're carrying around is, I'm not lovable. And that can be very sad, because they won't open themselves up at that point to really giving of themselves in their relationships, because they're coming from a point of closed. I'm not lovable, therefore I have nothing to give. And to kind of penetrate that attitude, you know, can be difficult without some help, because we carry it for years and years. So that's one of the big ones.
Yeah, and those imprints can almost act as a magnet, it seems, and start attracting those kind of situations that validate our attitude that we're not lovable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other attitudes that will piggyback on that. You know, if I don't see myself as lovable, I might not also see myself as interesting or fun. So if you carry that attitude, you're not going to get into a lot of friendships. You're not going to extend yourself to meet others, because you're closed into this mindset of, I'm not lovable, I'm not interesting, people aren't going to want to interact with me. And that causes people to end up in lonely situations, because they're not interacting with others out of this fear, out of this attitude that's perpetuating this sense of negative self, negative well-being. And so we focus on that a lot in relationship coaching. Here's some others. There's a big one, is that their fear that people will leave me. They carry around, when they go into a relationship, that the other person is going to end it. And so they sometimes beat them to the punch by letting go of the relationship prematurely, because they are trying to not be the one that's told that they're going to be left. So this attitude, a negative attitude that you carry around of, they're going to leave me, so I better leave first, really impacts people's ability to get into serious relationships. They can't commit because they're always fearing. They want that backdoor option to get out before the other person tries to get out. And so that's one. And I ask you, those that are listening, to think about, are some of these attitudes that you're currently carrying around, that you're not lovable, or that someone could leave me if I enter into a friendship, or if I decide that I'm going to get married, will they leave me? So I'm going to, maybe end this relationship before it goes to marriage. All kinds of ways that we will sabotage relationships when we carry that particular attitude.
The ways we sabotage relationships. Yes.
Yeah.
And can it be true too for those that are feeling like they might leave me, right? And then want to have the back door? Is it also true that they might become kind of clingy and needy and wanting to hold on so tight to make sure that they don't leave, or
right
bending over backwards to please the other person, so that there's no reason for them to leave them, right? There's that idea that they have to be perfect and do everything right as well. Is that also feed into that attitude?
That's another key attitude, is that I can't make a mistake. And, I can't make a mistake in my relationship. I can't make a mistake at work. I can't make a mistake in my marriage. And underlying that attitude is really this drive to be perfect in all situations. And so when that happens, when you carry that particular attitude, then you're no longer able to allow yourself to make a mistake. You see a mistake as failure. So someone who's worried and carrying an attitude of, I can't make a mistake, is actually saying to themselves, I need to be perfect all the time, which is not sustainable. It's just not, something that any of us can do. And I think with social media, sometimes that's heightened that sense, because people will go online, go onto, social media, and they'll see the perfect pictures that someone puts out there, or the perfect relationships that people are showing, but they're not seeing the struggles. They're not, obviously people very rarely post their challenges. So that gives a false sense that everyone else is doing well, but I'm making all these mistakes. So it kind of reinforces that negative image of, well, everyone else seems to have it together, but I'm making these mistakes in my relationships. I'm making these mistakes, in how I care for myself. I'm making mistakes here or there. And it contributes to that perpetual self-blame, that you get caught in.
It's so true that people want to project, themselves in the best light, and then forget about the struggles and try to compare themselves to this perfect image that isn't totally real. That's one aspect of themselves. And I think it might have been Maya Angelou that said, that people tend to see the butterfly, but forget about and don't see all that it took to become the butterfly, the whole journey the caterpillar went through.
Right, exactly.
Complete metamorphosis, and the destruction, and the melting away, and just dismemberment, really, to be able to emerge as the butterfly. And so we don't always recognize the journey it takes to be perfect. And in that strive to be perfect also, if there's this intensity, this kind of energy that's given off that can actually repel people too.
I totally agree. Because people are picking up when people interact with us, they sometimes can sense our negative attitude before we do, because they've observed us over time, particularly if it's a long-term relationship, friend or coworker or spouse. They're seeing you day in and day out. They will notice the subtle changes that when you start going into negative attitudes, because your tone will change, your facial gestures will change, how you interact changes. You don't get as close to people, and they're very observant. And a lot of times that's where we get our information about our own negative attitude. Somebody will make a comment to us in a relationship and say, "Why are you always so hard on yourself?" People get that. Or, "Why do you have to be perfect?" When you start hearing that from others, that's a nice little buzzer light to tell you you're veering into the negative attitude, and they're seeing it. They're witnessing it when they interact with you. And so paying attention when others point it out to us is crucial, because they're giving us very valuable information about how we're relating and how we're carrying our attitudes with us.
Yeah, to think of it objectively as feedback, right? And open up a discussion for what can be better and what each person needs and values and supports. And often we project what we think the other person wants, and it might not even be what the other person wants. Is that true?
It's very true. Sometimes we misread how we're being perceived and how others perceive us, because that negative attitude is all we see and sense. We're paralyzed by it almost, emotionally. We say, "Okay, I'm not lovable." So when someone does extend, in a relationship, love or care, we question it.
Yes.
Are they really genuine? When really, it's really within ourselves that's blocking that. We're not allowing them to be loving of us because we're not giving that same attitude or care toward ourselves, our own self-care. We're not looking at ourselves as someone who needs self-care for us. And that happens to a lot of people who are very much pleaser types. When they're out there spending a lot of energy on helping others, and then they don't look at themselves as this other person that needs care.
Right.
So they just don't take the time for themselves to care about their own emotional well-being, and the attitudes are part of it, part of the block.
Yeah, and it really affects our level of self-esteem, our self-worth. And when we have these kind of self-deprecating attitudes, then we lack that self-acceptance. And then if we can't accept ourselves, then we don't see anyone else accepting us as we are either, and really resist or push them away or repel them, or just create otherwise dysfunctional dynamics in the relationship. So how do we flip the switch then, Michelle?
One of the, I have a couple of steps that people can take when these, we all have negative attitudes come in our head. We just do. And again, we said the source of those attitudes comes from a variety of places. For some, it's the early childhood experiences, how family gave them a message or of what their attitude of themselves is. It can come from marriage issues. It can come from friendship issues. But regardless of what the source is, we can move from having this attitude of negativity to affirming ourselves. We can go from self-blame to self-affirmation by starting off with awareness. And so what I mean by that is keeping a journal, writing down the times when you have caught yourself saying negative things about yourself. When are those times? Because you're not going to be able to look at patterns until you write down what situations tend to prompt me to go into this self-negative attitude. Is it when I'm under a lot of stress at work? Is it in my marriage? Is it if I'm dating someone? Is it when I start to enter into a new dating relationship? Do then all these negative attitudes start pouring out? So writing, first step, get a journal, get some paper, spend some time really writing down different times when those have come up, particularly if it's just come up. That's even better if you can catch it, but sometimes you might, be busy with something else. But just reviewing at the end of your day, if you don't have time during the day, before you go to bed at night, jotting down, was there anything today that I said about myself that was negative? Just jot it down. And then over time, you want to do what I call a self-care review, where you start looking at the patterns in your journal that you've kept. When is this occurring? What kinds of situations am I going into a negative self-attitude? And what are my emotions when I go into it? Is it when I'm upset and angry that these pour on? Is it when I'm sad and depressed that these start creeping up? Because for each person, it will be different. It won't be the same for everybody. So it's keeping a journal, it's doing the self-care review, looking and seeing the situations. And then after that, I have this, what I call thought stop, where let's say a negative attitude comes in. You have the I'm not lovable pop into your head. Right at that moment when it's taking hold, you close your eyes and you say to yourself, stop. You're mentally telling yourself, stop. And at that moment, you're going to replace that message with a positive counterpart. So in this case, if the negative message is, I'm not lovable, you'd say, stop. I am lovable. You immediately replace it. And then you can reinforce that throughout your day by putting post-notes, whatever little tool you want to use around you with the message that supports that. So if my struggle is I'm not lovable, and it coming into my head and I say, stop, I am lovable, I'm going to be looking around the key places that I've put that message. Maybe it's my bathroom mirror, maybe it's my nightstand, in my car, on my refrigerator, but I need that positive reinforcement of myself so that I'm staying on track with a positive message, because it's so easy to slip into that negative mode and not reaffirm ourselves. So positive message reinforcement by surrounding ourselves with those messages. And finally, if you're struggling even with all the messages and you're really feeling like you can't break through this, I really do recommend relationship coaching. I'm a relationship coach. We help work on those areas, but it can be very challenging for some people because it can be long time patterns that you're trying to break. And having the help of someone that can talk to you, reflect back to you, point out where those areas are and work with you can be a big benefit. So I do recommend that. But at home, you can do this too, where you're constantly replacing negative images. But the trick is being aware of them. You know, a lot of times we just go through our day not realizing that we're even self-sabotaging, that we're even putting ourselves down throughout the day in little ways. So recognition is the first step.
Yes, and it sounds like we become a witness to our thoughts and attitudes and patterns and behaviors in those situations, creating that awareness. And it sounds like an empowering process to then be able to stop it, right? To have the power to stop it and to turn it into something more positive, right? I am lovable. And then putting that everywhere. And I know that when you have messages all around you, whether you're directly looking at them or not, they're actually reprogramming or programming your subconscious mind too. And so even in the background, that change and that transformation starts to happen. So I can see how that could really work. And then relationship coaching, I think, is really important as well, because it's much different than going to your friends or family or social media for advice and feedback about relationships or watching reality TV, right? You get some real time, real life advice specific to your relationship from someone who really knows and gets it, and is not going to be influenced by, if you already have an attitude of wanting to please and be a certain way for other people, going to social media, friends or family, just feed back into that again. So nothing really changes, that it can actually become even more confusing. So coaching and counseling can really be supportive, and surrounding yourself with good people as well that do support you, that do love you and lift you up, and being willing to accept that kind of love as well. And
exactly. And just having the support, having the emotional support of a trained professional is very helpful. My whole background has been as a licensed therapist. So I think that's very important that you're with someone who has been trained, because, human interactions are very delicate. They're very personal. They require work. They require someone who is trained. And so it's very important that you select somebody who has that kind of training in human relationships.
Yes. And so what kind of things come up in the relationship? Are you, when we're talking about self-care, are you just seeing the individual? Are you seeing the couple, or kind of a combination of both?
I say a combination of them. A lot of people like to come in individually, even if they're struggling with a partner, because sometimes they have trouble getting the partner to come in, and doing some work around, even if you're dealing with a marital issue or dating issue, and your partner doesn't want to come in, there's a lot that you can do individually to help support you during that relationship. But yes, both would be the answer to your question. Yes.
Yes, that healing and that personal growth can come through that for the current and future relationships, or even being able to reconcile some hurt from previous relationships.
Exactly. And I use a formula that I developed called growth. It's GROWTH. And each letter means something in the
I love
process.
acronyms.
Yeah, here we go.
Let's go there. Tell me more.
Yeah. So the G in growth stands for gaining awareness of yourself and your relationship goal. So you come into a relationship coach like myself, and we're going to spend time looking at your relationship history, and your goal for your relationship, because it's different for every person and what they're looking for. And sometimes with couples, it's different between the couple. They think they're coming in on the same page of what relationship goal, and you get into that session and they're on 2 pages. They each have a different goal. And it's important that we identify that goal so you can work on the same page.
Yeah, because you don't want to go into a relationship with an agenda, but on some level, there's some kind of goal, something that you're needing from the relationship, and also what you're wanting to contribute to the relationship. So it's interesting to think about it as a goal in a relationship.
It is a goal. It is a goal, because goals help people move forward to take action. When it's sort of nebulous out there and you don't really have a goal for your relationship, you can go in a million directions. You're not sure where. Do we start with communication? Do we start with conflict resolution? Where do we start? And so identifying the issue, the goal is paramount to the beginning of the process. And then from there we go to the R, which is recognizing the blocks that you have. So in other words, what's getting in the way of you having a healthy relationship or healthy self-care? Or you could be coming in for just yourself, about self-care for yourself. And what's blocking? Where are those blocks that aren't getting you where you want to go? We take a long look at that, because people might not even be aware of the blocks that they have. They think it might be in this area. And then when they start talking, they realize, wait a minute, I'm actually blocked over here too. Or I've got a different block than I thought, So the opportunity to look at those blocks. And then the O in the growth word is openness. In order to change, there has to be an openness to wanting to go through a process of change. And sometimes people will come in thinking that they're open and they've closed off. They really want to stay in the pattern that they're in, no matter whether it's unhealthy to them or not, because fear of change is harder for them than staying with the status quo. So we work around, where are your resistances? Where is your barrier to being open to changing an unhealthy pattern? What's blocking your openness to that? And then W is, we are working on action steps that we come up with together, mutually looking at the action steps that you want to take to get toward your goal. And it's going to vary, again, for every single person is different on how many steps or what kinds of steps. It's unique to each situation. And then the T in growth is transformation, your transformation to change, to making a healthy habit for a healthy relationship. And then finally, H is your healthier relationship. So it's this process of growth. It goes from awareness on down through transformation and openness to a healthier relationship.
And the goal being a healthy relationship.
Yes, healthy relationship with self and healthy relationship with how we interact with others, because they're crucially linked.
Yeah, and it sounds kind of like we've been talking about romantic relationships.
And relationships and friendships apply as well.
Yes.
Yeah, because people have come in with relationship issues in the friendship area.
Oh, okay.
And it's around these same issues. They may have had friendships that are constantly breaking off, and they're wondering, why am I losing friends? Why am I not keeping a serious friendship relationship? And again, it goes back to some of these same negative attitudes. The friend gets exhausted by the person constantly being negative, and they leave the relationship. They leave the friendship because they feel that they're constantly having to reaffirm you when you're not reaffirming yourself. So that can put a big strain on friendship relationships as well.
Yeah. So what about relationships like between a boss and employee? Because I know that can be really strained at times, right? And then you have the pressure of the possibility of losing your job, right? If you don't succumb to the boss's wishes or do what the boss needs you to do.
Yeah, and you have that you're so right. And you have that added layer of a power dynamic, because in a boss coworker, unlike your other relationships, there's a different power dynamic where your economic livelihood is based on your ability to interact with this individual. They're paying your bills, for your job. So if there's a power dynamic there, and also if they're your supervisor, your boss, there is a employee boss dynamic that comes in that is different than the other relationships that you are having in your life. There's a power
Right.
dynamic difference. So that has to be
Power can come into play.
right.
Power play, literally. And then what about the spiritual? What about spiritual relationships and connection? What do those look like?
Yeah, it's glad you say that. Spiritual is very important to me. My background work is in spiritual work as well. And I like working with people who want to go in that direction as well. Because your spirituality, whatever your particular spirituality is, your sense of God or your sense of a higher power or greater purpose affects how you see the rest of your relationships. If you are feeling disconnected from your higher power or your sense of a God or higher power, you carry that sense of disconnection into all the other relationships.
Right.
So yeah, going and talking with people about what is important to them for their spiritual journey. How do they bring spirituality into their life for them, for their relationships? Because again, it's different for each person. People have different beliefs and value systems, starting with where they're at, what their concepts and beliefs are, and finding out whether those are working with their partners or if they're experiencing incompatibility between themselves and a partner on the spiritual level. There's maybe some friction because they're coming from different value systems. So we take a look at that when people are struggling with those issues.
Amazing stuff here. And so how does this affect us physically? Because in the beginning you spoke about it was the physical health of your mom that really got to you, that really affected you. And so how can these kind of attitudes actually affect us physically?
Yeah, because what happens is the longer we carry these negative attitudes, the more we start to experience health issues, because everything is so connected. People have heard the term body, mind, and spirit, but it is true that when you look at a holistic approach and you see that when one part of ourselves, one area of our life is affected, the rest is. So if we're out of balance emotionally, we're going to be out of balance socially. We're going to then have physical manifestations of that with either headaches or fatigue, or we run into feeling run down with our immune system because we're so worried about emotionally and socially about our relationships that now we're feeling it physically. And we start to see that change physically because we're holding on to so much emotion around our attitudes, around our values, that we feel that we manifest itself in the physical.
Yes, that's so true. I remember when I was doing energy work, we are multidimensional beings and we have this physical body, but then it's emotional, mental, and spiritual and beyond as well. And we start out here, right? In the spiritual, in the void, and where everything can become a seed.
Yes.
And then it moves in mentally, right? Our attitudes, the way we think about that, the way we interpret our realities. And then it feeds into our emotional, how we start feeling about things and what kind of emotions and energy come up out of that. And if there's a block anywhere along the line, it affects all the other layers. So if we have a spiritual block, if we're not even spiritually connected and lost, that affects us mentally, emotionally, and physically right away because it's already blocked out there in the spiritual. Right. And then those mental blocks, right? Those mental blocks that we just don't become aware, that we don't see yet, unless it's brought to our attention in some way and brought to our awareness. And then emotionally, how emotional upheaval can happen. And then we start feeling anxious and lonely and in despair and depressed and all of those things. And then if it's not dealt with and it creates a block there, then it manifests physically and makes us physically ill from that state of dis-ease that has become that journey along the way. And the same thing physically, if we're not physically well, then that affects us emotionally and mentally, and then spiritually as well. As like, how could this happen to me, right? You start questioning, have those bigger questions again that you put out there. And it's definitely an interplay between all of those levels of being. Absolutely.
Yeah, because when I'll see people when they're going through a transformation and they make breakthroughs, in coaching around emotional and social issues, suddenly some of the physical issues that they also mentioned they have can start to lessen or go away because that stress is not on them now. They're not getting those headaches, or they're not getting that extra fatigue or that sense of feeling run down. Because they're not juggling as much negative energy. They're not juggling as much negative attitudes that's really hurting them physically. So they're so interrelated. It can't be can't be emphasized enough how every part of those areas are interrelated.
So what kind of positive attitudes can people carry and start to reprogram and recondition the way that they think about things?
When you see someone who's gone through transformation and now they're carrying positive messages into their relationships, you got somebody who is just emanating that sense of authenticity. They're emanating a sense of positivity. We've all seen that with different friendships that we're in, or marriage relationships or dating relationships, where we've hit upon somebody who just seems positive all the time, who's doing good self-care, who takes a break when they know they need a break, who is articulate in how they communicate with others about their needs and their feelings. You know when you've hit someone, around someone with that type of wholeness, because it just emanates. They have a positive framework from which they're looking at life. And so, for example, those attitudes would be the opposite of what we just said. They have that, they ruminate, I am lovable. They believe that when they go into a relationship, it will work out because they know that they've got the skills to make it and the commitment to make it work. So it's all that positive energy, and they're spiritually connected. They've got that source from within themselves, from their God, from higher power, that gives them that well that they can draw from, of feeling kind, of feeling compassionate, of wanting to help others, because they're drawing from that positive well. So it's so important. It's so important.
And you help people feel that well.
Well,
people feel that well. And I know you have a special gift for our audience today. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
I do. I really would like to gift those of you that were interested. I have a 30-minute complimentary coaching session just come on and go to my website. We'll talk about that, and click on my calendar and book a 30-minute session, totally complimentary for you, because I do this as a gift because so many people, particularly during this pandemic, they're struggling alone. They're trying to handle difficult relationship issues or self-care issues alone, and there's no reason why you should have to do that. And I really hope that you take advantage of that for an opportunity. Maybe you've never had a chance to talk to somebody outside family and friends who can be an objective listener for you and give you that feedback, totally complimentary. So yes, and my website
is a generous offer, Michelle. Thank you so much. And then it gives people a chance to feel it out too, right? And just step into that and see what else is possible.
Right. There's no obligation. It's just you coming in and we share with what you're struggling with, and we talk and we see if it's a good fit or if you'd like more, or maybe you just want that 30-minute session to kind of talk out what's happening with you. And that's okay too, because it is a gift. It is being given for you. So I hope that you'll take advantage,
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And so what's the website that people can
Yes,
click
my
into?
website is my name, Michelle, M-I-C-H with 2 L's, E-L-L-E, my middle initial M. And then my last name is Castelli, and that's spelled CASTELLI.com, MichelleMCastelli.com. And at the website,
MichelleMCastelli.com.
yes.
Perfect. And we'll have that in the description as well, everyone. So you can just click into that.
Yeah, there's also, if you go to my website, there is podcast episodes there for you to listen to that are right on the website. There's blog articles. So there's other tools there too for you to just take a look at. And again, those are all free to look at and listen to. So
a lot of great resources. Wonderful. Are there any final words of wisdom that you'd like to impart on the audience, Michelle?
I say to all of you, it's so important to take the time to do a little relationship review with yourself. Just really spend the time. I know everybody's very busy, but if you can spend a little bit of time in the evening or in the morning, just really getting a feel for how you relate to others. We talked earlier about attitudes. When did you have a negative self attitude pop in that day? Maybe you've had none that day, and that's great. You can affirm yourself for not having it. But if something came in, just write it down, because the more aware you are of when they happen and why they happen, the better you and more open you are to making a change to get rid of them.
Absolutely. Amazing. Thank you so much, Michelle. What great information that you shared with us today, and the growth process and that opportunity to be able to meet with you for half an hour. It's wonderful. And all the other great resources, the blog and podcast on your site as well, that people can have a look around. So thank you so much for being here today. And thank you everyone for joining in and tuning in and listening from wherever you are. Love to hear your comments. Like this video if it inspired you in some way. And also, of course, subscribe to our channel. We'd love to see you again.
Thank you, and have a great day.